Okay. It is now 5 o'clock on the dot, and I call to order this January 24th public meeting of the Silverton Historic Review Committee. Can we please have a roll call, Miss Anna?
All right. Maria Zamora.
Here.
David Pollitt.
Yeah.
Melissa Childs. Mayor Furman. And Jesse Rowe.
Here. Okay, so all members should have, thanks to Lucy, a copy of the agenda before them. We will now call for any revisions to the order of the items on the agenda or any additions to the agenda.
I don't have any additions to the agenda, but the minutes from the last meeting.
We'll discuss the minutes in a minute.
Okay.
I have a revision. We are going to remove the review of 661 Green Street per the town attorney's advice. This will now go through code enforcement. And that is my only revision to the agenda.
Okay, and just as a point of order, I think at the meeting, only voting members are allowed to make revisions to the agenda unless we modify our bylaws or we don't use Rob's rules. So let's just, in the future, if there's like an agenda omission like that, maybe we'll just chat beforehand or something, or we'll change the bylaws. I guess for me personally, I have some sympathy for our applicants. So in case there's substantive review for the bylaw updates or the approval of the minutes, I would suggest that we just move those after the public hearings, and then we can just go right from the public hearing procedure, which I just asked Lucy to go over the public hearing procedure for all of us since it's our first public hearing, and then go directly to the remaining public hearing that we have on the agenda today. And if someone just as a point of order wants to suggest we remove that item pursuant to Lucy's suggestion, I'm happy to do it. I just don't want to make all the motions and also be the committee chair.
Go ahead.
Okay, I'm going to also
Sorry that I should have played. What was the suggestion to remove something?
So we're going to remove the 661 Green as staff has recommended that be only covered by code enforcement. And then I suggested we move bylaw and minutes to the end so that we can get right into our public hearing process and we don't have the applicants waiting.
Got it.
Do you have any additions or
I mean, I guess I would be curious when we get to the agenda item for 661 Green, or now for removing it, to understand the decision, since obviously the application was pending for a while and then it was decided to put in front of this committee. And I just was curious what factors went into changing the recommendation.
Yeah, and we could certainly go by the, like, I think as in terms of order, we could certainly go by the public hearing and open the public hearing and then just have Lucy do the staff report. Why it's not.
I am requesting that we remove it from the agenda per advice from our attorney.
Cool. Okay, then that's fine with me. I thought you saw my notes earlier that were kind of along the same lines. I wasn't sure if there was anything for us to review, but cool.
And again,
no objection.
Okay, and that's item for public hearing exterior renovations at 661 Green within the A-Rod is being removed. Right?
It looks like Gloria has her hand raised too.
Yeah. Gloria, do you have something to add? You're on mute.
Sorry, I was just trying to get promoted to panelist, but I think I'm there. Yeah, so we did talk to the town attorney on that application, and we'll actually be
we lost you.
On mute. Gloria, you're back on mute.
Okay, I don't know how much you heard of that, but
we heard you talk to the town attorney and then it cut out.
Yeah, so we talked to the town attorney about that application, and he suggested we go through code enforcement moving forward. since they had already moved forward with those windows. So we need to put this on code enforcement at this point.
Okay, so our new agenda then revised is public hearing procedure, then the current item 51129. Public hearing, and then we'll
Sorry,
do
I'm not,
bylaws.
can I
Yeah.
interject again?
Yes.
Gloria, I'm just curious if, like, this is a unique first for us with the 661. And I guess my question is just if at some point in the future we can understand what the committee's role would be in a historic review issue like this, where they're kind of like, they've already done the work, submitted an application that hasn't been reviewed. Like, will code enforcement be curious to know this community's view on anything that would have been under its purview if the application had come? Or is this something that code enforcement simply handles as like a potential like breach of code since they didn't follow the process? I guess maybe you can't say that if there's a potential dispute or something, but I guess I'm just curious in the future to unwind this a bit so that we can be informed if it comes up again.
Yeah, and I'm happy to have Clayton write a memo on this one and present it to you all at the next meeting. We are still working through this issue because it is a newer issue for us as well. So okay. Clayton and I are working on how to move forward with this one.
That sounds great. Thank you.
Cool. Yep.
I also
Sorry,
have a
Lucy,
question.
all yours. Oh, sorry.
Oh, that's fine. What's up?
I have a question as well on 661 Green, because we were given the packet in advance and I read it. And so I had a couple questions. One was on their fencing.
Mm-hmm.
And the other one was, how would they get their propane delivered with these big fences?
Okay, so I think
so now we don't have any input. Is that what you guys are telling me?
For this meeting, that might change in the future, and we'll update you once we discuss this further with our attorney.
There's also certain items that are like within our purview, and so like propane delivery is kind of more a use review item, for example.
Pardon me?
It's more of like a use subject review. Like if there was a use subject review, that's maybe when that would come up or something. If the fence were, because I like, regardless, we're not talking about that one right now, but
yeah,
but that's a great question. Okay, so we will move on to the first item on the agenda unless there are any other revisions to the agenda from the committee members. Awesome. Okay.
Actually, yes. Just to clarify that the memo connected to previously item 5 for 1129 Green Street, that relates to the mixed use residential purpose on the first floor, is for our reference only and not part of our review. And that's something that was clarified over email by CPS, but didn't make it in the packet. And so just, I'm not sure if that needs to be part of the agenda itself, but for anyone who's, thinking that that's part of our review, that was just for context.
Thanks, Jane. There were other suggestions that happened via email regarding the checklist and suggestions for format changes to staff reports in general. I would just suggest that during the public hearing process, out of courtesy for the applicants, if we're able to separate at any point those discussions from the applicant review, we can add within the bylaw item, if everyone's comfortable with it, any type of procedural discussion that may arise as a result of our hearing process. All right, so the first item then is the public hearing procedure. Once again, I just asked Lucy to do a quick overview for what we should expect during a public hearing. And Lucy, the floor is now yours.
And I'll actually hand it over to Chris to discuss public hearing procedures. Go ahead, Chris.
All right, can you guys see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, so this first slide, as you requested, is kind of a meeting procedure for the Historic Review Committee. So start by opening and closing the meetings with public comments. And as far as the applications themselves, start with the staff presentation, followed by applicant presentation or applicant comments if they needed to kind of clarify anything. And then following that is public comments specific to each application. And after that is a kind of a time for staff or the applicant to respond to any public comments. And then after that response is a time when the commissioners kind of discuss the applications amongst themselves, and following that is the commissioners' actions on the application.
So Chris, just as a point of clarification, because this is the overview specifically for the public hearing process, right?
Yes.
So, and this may be just such a simple point of order, but my understanding of the public hearing process normally in our other committees is that the public hearing is actually opened at the beginning of the staff presentation and then closed when the motion is approved or denied. Is that, I mean, I know there's a public comment opening and closing portion, but could you clarify about that?
Yes, you're correct.
Okay, so when you say open and closed public hearing, you mean open and closed public comment on this particular slide?
Yes. So at the beginning of each meeting, there's typically time for any public comments regarding, you guys haven't discussed anything yet. So whether it be over the minutes, over the staff reports, or any of the meeting material, you can start off by public comments. I mean, you could take that into account whenever you're reviewing all this stuff. And then at the end, it gives kind of an opportunity for people to voice their opinions about how the discussions went. So that's what the open and closing public comments are for the public hearing.
Okay, great. And then there's also an item, staff applicant response, that comes before commission discussion. And I noticed that in the town, like the standard hearing procedure for the town, there's just general discussion. And then during the discussion, the committee members are able to ask the staff and applicant questions. Is that what is meant by this, or is this something else?
Yep, that's it.
Okay, and then generally speaking, is there a moment of specific applicant rebuttal before the commission takes action where we say like, hey, if you have anything else, you can speak now?
You can certainly ask for that. It's
Okay.
up to your purview to do.
Okay. Sorry, that was a lot of questions. Anyone else? Questions, thoughts? All right, that appears to be pretty straightforward. And if there's no further discussion, I'll move on to starting one of the hearings. The only hearing now. Okay. We will now move to agenda item previously known as number 5, public hearing exterior renovations at 1129. And I think implied there is 1129 Green Street within the historic overlay and A-Rod district. This hearing was noticed to the public on the 11th of January. The public hearing is now open and will take the form of a staff presentation, applicant presentation, followed by the opportunity for public comment. We will then proceed with discussion and decision for the applicant. For committee members, if there is a perceived conflict or a conflict of interest for 1129 Green Street, this is the time to leave the room. Do we have any conflicts? Okay, seeing none, staff, the floor is yours.
Thank you. So the only application for you all tonight is for exterior renovations within the Architectural Review Overlay District and the Historic Overlay District located at 1129 Green Street. An overview of the project, as mentioned, is located at 1129 Green Street. The applicants are Citizen State Bank, and it's the former Brown Bear Cafe building. The applicant on behalf of the owner will be Timothy Stroh, the project architect. It is located within the BP Zone District and the Architectural Review Overlay District and the Historic Overlay District. And I included this insert on the bottom to kind of let you know that the applicants have kind of went above and beyond most requirements for town. They submitted an application to the National Park Service for historic rehabilitation work and received approval and tax credits, both state and federal level. So, and that application was included with tonight's packet. As you mentioned, it was posted on the town website and in the Silverton Standard Minor on January 11th. And all required documents and materials were submitted the 1st of December, and fees were paid upon submittal. The proposed improvements include the replacement of windows, converting a ground level door into an ATM, fixing damaged facades, and installing an elevator shaft that will exceed the 40-foot maximum height limit in the BP and Historic Overlay District. As mentioned prior, interior renovations and proposed usage are not under the purview of the HRC, and this information was only included to provide context of the project. The submitted application material demonstrates that the proposed improvements meet the lot size requirements for the zone district and overlay district. The applicants will be seeking a variance for the building height exceeding the height restrictions through the Board of Adjustments in February. No public comments have been received. The time this presentation was created.
Could you say that last slide one more time? Sorry, about the Board of Adjustments.
Yes, the Board of Adjustments will be reviewing the height. The 5-foot exceeding height variance in February.
Okay, thank you.
Staff recommends that the Historic Review Committee approve the application for exterior renovations within the Historic Overlay District and A-Rod with the following conditions. We would like you guys to discuss the application and determine if sufficient screening is provided for the rooftop elevator and stair enclosure as viewed from the public street, so it does not detract from the historic appearance of the building. In addition, we would like you to discuss whether the original door on the north side of the main storefront entrance, whether it should be converted to an ATM or preserved as required by the builder's handbook. And kind of an overview of your guys' next steps. So the Historic Review Committee shall approve as presented, approve with conditions, or deny the application. And now the floor is now open for discussion or questions.
Okay, so just as a point of order, I believe the applicant goes next before we discuss, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Do we have an applicant present?
Yes.
Okay. Hi. So if you will please state your name and make your presentation. Sorry, I have to recognize you technically.
Thanks, Joe. I'm the architect. I'm also the preservation consultant for this project. Thank you for moving us forward on the agenda so I can travel home at a decent hour. I do appreciate that. I'm only in Montville, so not very far. The project, as Chris mentioned, he did a great job of overview. We've been working on this project well over a year. I actually am the second architect. The previous architect passed away. So doesn't really have a lot of that, but there was some previous design work that was done. And we had talked to the city probably about a year ago about the work that we were looking at doing. And we decided to go ahead and move forward with getting tax credit approvals through the federal historic tax credit program, the National Park Service, and the historic commercial tax credit through Office of Economic Development. So we developed the drawings and the designs based on that, which follows the Secretary of Interior standards for rehabilitation. And so the drawings and that have submitted before you are what have been approved through both the state and federal programs for preservation. I don't think I want to go over too much more than what Chris did. There's a couple of things too that I saw in the packet. I got the packet yesterday. So I do want to reserve if there's any questions or discussions. It might be I didn't see it in the packet. If there's some, I'd like to reserve that and be able to. I think it was maybe in the CPS memo, and I'm sorry I don't have the page number. I think there was a mention of this being a 3-story building somewhere. It's a 2-story building. I think it was just sort of a look over. There was some comparison between this building and 3-story building standards, but regardless, I just wanted to be aware of that. The ground floor restaurant that was there actually was the entire ground floor and the second floor, the back half of the second floor. So really it was a mixed use building of a restaurant that kind of made an L shape that way with one apartment. So and bear with me here. We did leave materials on the roof enclosure that comes up above the roof somewhat vague on purpose, knowing that there would probably be materials requests by Silverton, and we wanted to remain flexible on what kind of materials we put on that. And the state and federal were okay with that. Still want to know what kind of materials we would want to use. As far as the ATM, since that's been brought up here, one thing I would probably disagree with, and it's probably nomenclature, but details make the difference. On page 7 of 9 on the staff report under item 5, it says the original door, and that's an existing door, but both the federal programs and state programs, when we looked at that specifically, said that's not original. It's just what's there. It is shown in some of the historic photos, but there was a fire in that area and that area has been modified. And that's actually one of the reasons why we're allowed to modify that under state and federal rules for preservation. So we know it's not existing. We don't really have any documentation of what was exactly there. And so like where you look at our ATM, you can see that there's actually the original transom that's staying. There's another transom because we know that the other doors had a transom. And then we're doing an infill for the ATM, which we can at some point in the future, if they need to, a future owner can easily take that out and put a door back in and be the right size and proportion. So there's some of the area behind that. And then let's see here. So on the screening on the rooftop, I'm not quite sure I understand that, but I can give you the reasoning behind where the elevator is, where it's at. In the builder's handbook and kind of best practices with historic buildings, we try to locate any elevator towers, or I call them accoutrements, but things that come up above the roof, they're functional. Try to push them as far away from every property line as possible to minimize those view corridors. So the reason that elevator corridor, the elevator tower is where it's located is because that is literally the most innermost spot on that property that we could push it. It's the furthest away from, well, I call it the west, but furthest away from the alley, the west, and Green Street. So there's that. I think the last thing to understand, and I know that the cities are becoming a certified local government, but with these tax credits, one of the important things for any developers to look at is if one of the original designs of this was to have an elevator on the outside of the building, and for tax credit purposes, that would not count toward tax credits. But by putting the elevator on the interior of the building, they're able to take the work and the cost of that elevator and those improvements and get federal and state tax credits toward that. So if you can imagine the cost of anything that's going on, whether it's stairs, life safety improvements, anything, sprinkler, whatever it is on the inside of the building, by putting it on the inside of that existing building, they're able to then claim those tax credits on it. And if you put it on the outside, they're not able to do that. So I think with that, I'll leave it right there, kind of withhold any comments. I'm happy to discuss any of it. There's been a lot that's gone into this project. I'm happy to discuss pretty much anything. So with that, I'll just leave it right there.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, so we'll now move to the public comment portion of our hearing. Already attending. We'll do in-person public comment if there is any, and then move to online. Each public commentator will have 3 minutes. Please raise your hand on the Zoom if you want to be recognized to speak. All right. Seeing none, we will move to the next section of the hearing, which is committee discussion. We'll now close the public comment portion and allow the committee to discuss the application question. For the committee, we can ask questions directly of the applicant or directly of CPS or Lucy if we so desire. So the floor is yours, committee.
I do have a question about the elevator. And I understand this is a two-story building.
This is a two-story building.
What is the purpose of an elevator in a two-story building?
So the purpose of the elevator is actually to go to the roof as well. And so the client, what they gave us as a program is they'd like to make the facility ADA compliant, allowing the roof deck to also be ADA compliant, so it can be used by the public. Otherwise, if we have any sort of roof deck or anything up there, it can only be used by the occupants of the building. So they've done this in Uray at the Citizen State Bank in Uray, where it's allowed to be used by the public. It's public. They consider it a public feature. And so they wanted to put the elevator in to, one, make the building ADA, fully ADA compliant, and then also make that so it can be used by the public in general if needed.
And the use for the public in general would be for receptions and things of that nature?
Be for a reception, could be for an event. I will say from an architectural code standpoint, I'm sure this isn't what you get into, but the restriction of that deck is a certain size. It only allows up to 49 people maximum because there's only going to be one exit legally out of there. Anything over 49 people would require two exits, and that's pretty much impossible.
But you can't use an elevator in a fire, right?
Yeah, an elevator will return to a certain spot if there's a fire alarm triggered. So it's not really considered an exit except under very extreme circumstances. For this, no.
And what is the reason why this elevator shaft can't be put on the back of the building? So it isn't viewed from the street?
We felt that, well, there's a couple of reasons. One is following the builder's handbook. This was some of the recommendations to sort of minimize that height from all sides. And we felt, especially when you consider there's residential on the other side of the alleyway, if you think about the massing of the commercial area and going down to the residential, that elevator would look quite tall back there. This also is a central location. So when you're thinking of circulation space within the building, you want to minimize that so you can increase space for the apartments. So having a centrally located elevator, it makes the most sense for the apartments, for the bank, and for general use.
Can I pick up on the view from the street comment? Because in the application, I think it says that actually if you face onto the building from Green Street, the elevator won't be really visible because of the frontage of the building. It's only really visible from the east side through the unoccupied lot, which will be a courtyard, and that's just a consequence of there being no commercial building in that space. So I don't think it'll be visible from most angles on Green Street, but it seems like it will just be visible from certain angles when you're looking at kind of caddy corner. Is that correct?
Correct.
I understand that. I saw that in the notes.
Yeah. I'm curious from CPS on this elevator issue. So I'm reading in your section called the purpose of review, the requirements for A-Rod shall be in addition to all underlying zoning district and any other overlay district requirements. If requirements do differ, then the most standard stringent shall apply. So we have 4 standards related to the elevator, and I'm not sure how many of them are relevant for this committee. I mean, I know that there was a mention that that there will be a Board of Adjustments review of this. But for all 3 of those overlays, we don't allow more than 40 feet. It's kind of like a carte blanche, an allowance. So I guess what I'm curious from CPS is like, how much ability do we even have to really discuss the elevator issue? As a committee?
You guys are recommending bodies. You can make recommendations for the next, or either the Board of Adjustments or the Board of Trustees to take that into consideration, take your guys' conversations into consideration when they make their decision on the application.
I might add to that, Jesse. It seems like our comment as the Historic Review Committee should be restricted to the historical character of the building and whether it detracts from it rather than whether it...
Obviously, an elevator detracts from the historical value of that building or the historical view or structure, the way it was originally built.
Well, I think that's what we're discussing, but I don't think we should be extend our remit to whether the elevator should be there or not, that's for the Board of Adjustments to decide. I think the staff recommendation in the docket we received is appropriate in terms of saying that, well, we can decide whether there should be additional screening or something that adjusts the appearance of that elevator structure. But I think we have to be careful about what our remit is.
Yeah, Shane, I'd love to hear from you. I know you have your hand up.
Thank you. I guess before I have a comment, I was curious if CPS or Lucy can explain the like scope, like how this ends up in front of the Board of Adjustments, because that's really like that's a rarely called committee to look at kind of significant issues. And I'm just curious what the funnel is that gets this issue in front of them. If we can understand that, I think we might also be able to get a little bit more detailed into what we can and can't talk about, like was just being discussed.
So
Lucy?
throughout our review, one of the things we picked up quickly was the excess height. So in our pre-application meeting, we discussed with the applicants how that's not currently allowed. You would have to get a variance for the additional height requirement, or for the additional height caused by the elevator. So once that's kind of triggered, we reach out to the Board of Adjustments to schedule a meeting to have them review that height variance.
Gotcha. And that doesn't first go in front of the Planning Commission?
No.
And is that because of, I guess I don't understand. I thought the normal process was it would go in front of the Planning Commission, and then the Board of Adjustments acts as like the final arbiter if the applicant and the Planning Commission don't agree, or if there's, it's almost like our appeals court, but that's not the case.
No, variances go straight to the Board of Adjustments.
Got it.
Also, I just want to bring to the committee's attention that height, a variance for extended height has been permitted previously in the AROD for the Rainbow Garage in 2022. So this is something that has happened before.
Are there other instances of buildings over 40 feet?
The Grand Imperial is over 40 feet. And then the Rainbow Garage additions will be over 40 feet, both of which are in the AROD. In the Historic Overlay District.
That would have been nice to put in the minutes so we would have some context.
I think you're right. Shane, you have your hand up again?
Yep. Another question I have is, with respect to the scope of our review and the aesthetic nature of the historic district, are we only allowed to consider the view from a certain point on Green Street? Or because, for example, the entire west half of town can see the top of all of Green Street, as well as many other parts of town have like vantage that's up above. So are we only considering the street view from a certain point? And I'm good with whatever the answer is, but I'd like to figure that out so that we can, put some blinders on where we're supposed to.
Shane, I think your question might be answered by the phrase elements visible from the Heritage Tourism Corridor, which is defined, I believe, as the Historic Review District. So anything that you can see from Green Street or Blair Street, anything that's in the Historic Review District.
Got it. And then my last question is, even though there's a sentence in the packet that says this isn't very visible from Green Street, the rendering makes it look like it's going to stick up quite visibly from Green Street. So I'm curious if we choose not to comment on it because we don't view this as visible based on how verbally presented, but then the actual building plans come up and there's like a gigantic box sticking very obviously like 5 or 6 feet up above the facade of the building that you can view from the sidewalk across the street. We kind of have egg on our face. So I guess I'm curious if we can get a little clarity on, like, will this actually be visible? And are we then going to have a discussion about what sufficient screening is and how much of it's visible? Or can you tell us, with, in a definitive way that you cannot see this from the sidewalk? across the street.
Shane, is that a question for our applicant?
I think so. And then if Melissa has something to add to that question, I'd welcome that because she's seen a lot of things like this from the planning commission perspective.
Sure. And so, I mean, I think a story poll, with actual photographs would probably be helpful to illustrate what that really is going to look like. So a story poll where this actual, new roof extension and the new little structure above the existing roof. I think that would be useful. And I will say that, so the Grand Imperial has exactly the same sort of pop-up on top of their building. It's how they basically they have a staircase going to the roof, and then so that you could have a man door out onto the roof. They have almost a very similar sort of pop-up on their roof. And if you're looking for it and you're like, oh, you can see it, but it's in the center of the building, much like this one is. So I think you can look at the Grand Imperial and sort of get an idea of what this is going to look like on this building, which I think it's okay.
So just as a point of clarity, when I'm looking at the drawings, at least, it looks like it's from the center of the building, like when viewed from Green Street, but like very much to one side.
East-west.
Yeah, the east
North side.
facade, the northeast side. I guess we're on a bit of an angle.
Yeah, everyone kind of looks at the directions in a different way. So for the purpose of this, I'm fine if we discuss using the architectural renderings. But what's displayed here typically, like planning staff would describe as the north side.
Okay, so thank you for that clarity, Lucy. So from the north side, if you're standing on Green Street, theoretically.
But we're calling it the east side because that's what's in front of us, right?
Yes, for the purpose of this discussion,
right.
I think it would be best if we discuss based on the directions in the elevations and the site plan.
Thank you for that addition. Okay, so you could stand theoretically on Green Street and see it, but if you're standing right in front of it, because it's like set back 40 feet and the building is 40 feet tall. So if you're like right up in front, it's barely visible. And then the more you back up, the more visible it becomes. Is kind of, anyway, that's what I'm reading from this, but let's ask the applicant. Do you want to comment on this discussion? I would imagine you do.
Thank you. So, this is always hard to show people and try to anticipate what everybody wants to see. So before you are literally, the starts of construction documents. So what you're seeing are flat on elevations. There's no perspective in a sense. So what you're seeing is flat on as if there's no, 2D distance in that. So we've modeled it because I was curious as to how much you would actually see. But I think we're happy to create whatever views you would like to see. I think the key is, will you see it from Green Street? Sure. There's a vacant lot there. It's impossible not to see that. Will you see it if you go further down Green Street toward the highway? At some point, of course, you'll see it. I think the comment was made, you can see a lot of rooftops. So I think the key is for us is we've done our best to sort of make it as short as possible in order to get the necessary space for the elevator and the stair tower in there and reduce it in a way. And so we felt, would you see it from Green Street if you're standing across the street? No, you wouldn't. If you're standing right across from the building, if they decided in the future to build a building right there, then you would see even less of it if that was ever infilled. And there's been conversations about that. It's neither here nor there, but at what point when you go down the street one way or the other, will you see it? You'll see it, sure. But I think you'll have a hard time knowing that elevator top is related to this building. It'll look like another piece of the downtown environment. And so I think for screening for us is really like, what kind of materials would you like to see on that then blends it and makes it go away? that's kind of the way we tend to address these things. So I don't know if that helps or not, but architectural elevations are terrible for this kind of discussion. I'm sorry, but if we can sure do 3D drawings if we need to.
Thank you. Shane, you had your hand up. Did you have a question for the applicant?
Well, a couple things. I just want to say thank you. You're kind of a test case for us. This is the very first application that this committee has reviewed, which is newly formed. And so we're learning a lot on the fly. And a lot of my questions have been driving at, to what extent do we have even authority to weigh in on this? And so I'm really just trying to define that. To your benefit, I think if we look at page 43 of the packet, from that perspective, which is looking from south to north, or the west elevation on the renderings, we can see how far back the elevator is set back. And then I think if you imagine the angle relative to the sidewalk on Green Street, it probably is just barely visible. So I think that answers most of my questions. And if we're not permitted to consider the variance component, then I don't really have anything else on the height of the elevator. Or do I think I really have any comments on the screening if it actually isn't visible from the sidewalk across the street? The last question I would have that relates to this is, are there plans for additional less significant structures? So when the roof deck is constructed, will it have a cover to it, or something less permanent like string lights? And are we accidentally opening the door to something else that does become quite a bit visible up there? Or will it really just be an open air deck that can't be seen?
That's a great question. So, and a great clarification, I can answer that. So what you see on here is what we're planning on building, or what we'd like to build. In the Uray example, they do have additional trellis work and some other things that cover portions of the deck. What happens with the building code, and this is why there's no other horizontal surfaces, you get into a gray area that actually takes this from being a floor level to a complete floor. And so it drives other building code issues. And so this is really just meant to be an exterior deck with some planters around the edges, and maybe some railings. But those railings I think they're restricted to a certain height of 42 inches, and you wouldn't see those because of the way the parapets are set. And the planters are probably 24 inches tall. They're really meant as sort of an additional accessory. So, there's no other horizontal. What you see is what you get. And I will say this height is being driven by what the elevator clearances are. If we could make it lower, we would absolutely, we've already had conversations with the elevator company to just try to get this thing down as far as possible. So,
if your application is not approved by the variance committee, will you lose functionality of the building if you don't have the elevator?
I think you would lose the functionality of that rooftop deck and for public access. And we may, and I can't speak for the owner on this, they may decide to just remove it and take away the ADA access for those apartments as well.
Okay, so aside from it being removed, there would be no other visual implications that the committee would then consider. I'm just thinking, like, if for some reason you don't get approved, you have to come back to us. Like, will it look distinctly different if you're not approved?
I do.
You don't know. You can't speak for them.
So.
Okay.
And I reserve that, and I'll talk to Lucy. But I don't.
Okay, sounds good. Is there any more discussion on the elevators? Yeah, yes, Shane.
I've answered all my questions. Now I'm ready to state kind of my opinion, which is that I'm comfortable with our scope of review saying that, the building materials or screening materials should be, somewhat blended in with the other materials used on the building so that they don't stand out dramatically to the extent they're visible from the sidewalk across the street. otherwise, I don't see anything in here that's within the scope of this committee as I view it that would recommend anything other than approval, but I would also want a very bold asterisk provided to the Board of Adjustments that says we did not consider the height limit at all. And that is we're not making a recommendation on this application that relates in any way to the height limit.
Yeah, I think the only thing for me is a lot of these height limits are listed within the historic section of the code and then also within the AROD. And so there is a visual element of the height to consider, just in terms of like, which I think we are already considering. But that would be, I would agree with you that like the actual height itself is not up for discussion, is how I'm seeing it. Do we have people that are uncomfortable with the way the elevator will look, irrespective of height?
I do have a problem with that.
Okay.
But I'm not completely clear on what our preview here is and how far we can go with our opinions and if they'll be taken, if they have to go before a bunch of other committees. I'm not understanding even the point why we're here with this. If we don't really have a say in this elevator, how this elevator is going to look, where it's going to be placed.
Would it, I think it's
just
fair
because you're standing in one spot on Main Street and you can't see it, doesn't make it okay in my view.
Okay. So yeah, so just to be clear, I don't think we can say nothing about the elevator. We can only say visually how we feel about it and point to the code and say, this doesn't work for us relative to the code. You know, there's a number of places where ornamental, decorative, transoms, kick plates, all of that is referred to in the code. Unsurprisingly, there's not a lot of information about elevators.
Yeah.
So what?
Or ATMs.
Or ATMs, yeah. So, I mean, those are modern artifices that, I mean, there is one section, if we wanted to be like very strict, I think, as reviewed from the Heritage Tourism Corridor, proposed visual / aesthetic modernization of the historic architectural style / facade of existing structures in the architectural review overlay district is not acceptable. So whether or not this constitutes modernization, I think is for the committee to decide.
I don't think it represents modernization because from the exterior, it's going to look like the extension of the building. It's not going to look contrary to the code. I personally think it's set back far enough from Green Street that it doesn't significantly detract from the historic appearance. I don't know if there's further discussion to be had on the height of the parapet to the side of the building, since the rest of the parapet is only at 36.5 feet, I think. So it's not quite up to the 40-foot limit. So there might be some room in there to say, well, we recommend building that parapet up to the maximum to have that additional 5-foot overage be less prominent. But as I said, I don't think it detracts significantly from the historic appearance due to the setback against Green Street. I think before we make a recommendation, we should also consider the ATM. I personally think the ATM is less of an issue. I don't think the current door that's there, as the applicant said, it's not original. I don't think it's functional and doesn't do anything in the new design. I think an ATM would be an improvement from a public use point of view. And I think the application is sympathetic to the appearance of the frontage of the building. So I think from the ATM point of view, I don't have an issue with that one either.
Okay, so we're moving a little from the elevator discussion to the ATM discussion. I guess one thing I am a little curious about, because you proposed a creative solution for the applicant. And again, this is our first hearing. So I think we are not allowed as a committee, at least this is my understanding, and Lucy or CPS could clarify for us, but I don't think we're allowed to engineer or propose suggestions. Like, it does seem like a smart suggestion to make the front parapet 40 feet so you can see the elevator less, but like, are we even allowed to suggest that?
Well, I put it in the context of what's in the packet where it says that the committee should consider screening of that elevator height. So in my view, the screening is either from street level, so it's some kind of additional height along the side of the building, or it's screening in terms of what you cover that extension with.
Sure, and we could always give the applicant direction to come back to us with more screening, right?
Sure.
Is there a CPS opinion on how much we can modify the design under a conditional approval?
Yeah, you can certainly add conditions to the next board. They would have to come back with different elevations showing this. So they would, Board of Trustees would review that, your guys' condition approval, and see if they submitted updated elevations kind of showing an increased parapet wall, if that's what you guys would like to require.
Right, and elevations aren't cheap. Melissa?
Just on the elevator and the parapet wall, I don't see that that's really going to change much, because again, if you're across the street from this, you can't see this elevator anyway. So the parapet could look stranger if it's taller, if you're looking at it from the east or the west. And if you're looking at it, if you're looking at the east elevation and now we raise the parapet, it will kind of come up over that window that we're viewing. And I think that would look worse, honestly. And I just don't think you're going to get much by raising the parapet wall, only because you really have to get far away from the building for that to be a factor at all. And I think from the east to the west, particularly this east elevation, if we take the parapet wall up and now it like cuts that window off, I think that would look worse. Personally. So I just don't, I think it's okay as it stands. And again, I mean, the Grand, if you want to know kind of what this looks like, this is exactly the thing they have on the Grand Imperial. It's not an elevator, but it's intended for a man door to access the roof, just like this is. So yeah, you can see it if you're really looking for it, but you kind of got to be looking for it. So I don't know. I think it could look goofier if we bring the parapet wall up.
Yeah, I actually agree with you, Melissa, and I wasn't suggesting that. I was just putting it forward as a option to discuss, but I happen to agree with you.
Okay, so is there anything else? I mean, I think we have division on whether this is something that looks okay to us, you know, from a historical perspective. I don't know how much more discussion is going to get us to unity on that necessarily, just with the difference of opinions here. But I am curious if we want to address the issue of like what the material on the front of it looks like, because that is within our review. If there's should we, like, are you guys comfortable moving to that discussion? Okay. Just for the applicant, do you have a proposed material you would like on the exterior of the elevator as viewable slightly from Green Street?
So no, we purposely left the material selection open to what might be more appropriate for Silverton, knowing that we'd be before you. The feedback that we've gotten from the State Historic Preservation Office and the National Park Service, they would not want to see masonry because that's too close to what's already there. So they want to see a material that's a little bit different. So whether that's, you know, I think personally, I see a lot of metal panels around, whether that's a certain color or a look. But you know, we're happy to do something. We would ask that it's something that's somewhat durable to the elements, but we're open to what you think might be a more appropriate solution for this. We didn't come in here with some sort of like, it has to be X. We're open to that. So.
Is it important to this committee that if we were to approve this design, that one of the conditions of approval be the type of stuff that's on the exterior of the elevator? Let's say you're nodding.
Yes, I would say definitely, because I mean, whatever, if it were stuccoed, for example, or something like that, it could look really strange. So yeah, I think that would be an important condition.
Is it possible for us to give the condition that we defer to the recommendation of the National Park Service since they're already involved with the historic preservation? Shane?
Yeah, I was going to recommend that as well, because although it's somewhat counterintuitive, they actually are opposed to, like the applicant said, having it look like it's original. although they are making recommendations and funding historic preservation, they want things that are added to the building to be distinct from the original. So appropriate, but not unidentifiable, which is kind of interesting. Whereas I think left, without that guidance, this committee may be trying to recommend something that you couldn't tell was an addition. So I think that that's a really good suggestion where they're going to have the best interests of, the National Historic, preservation rules in mind.
Okay. So, I know we can't rule on this with a motion yet, but I feel that while we have some division about whether we like the elevator, we have some consensus about if the elevator happens, what we want to do, maybe? Okay. Is there any more elevator discussion, or should we maybe move on to doors and ATMs and facade and double hung windows? Okay. All right, so one thing that I did notice is that you're doing new double hung windows, and I'm just kind of curious, are you doing those because you believe that to be the historic standard or because that's what you want?
It's a great question. So the street facing windows, just for clarification, what we have approved, they will be double hung windows that are completely wood and painted on the exterior. That's what we have been told is required by the state and federal.
Okay.
So they'll be wood. They allow wood metal clad windows where we're adding these on the side. And so the reason those are the conforming pattern that they are is fold one is functional because we need to provide into bedrooms and egress. And also those are the same height as the arched windows on the front. So we are trying to maintain some sort of uniform height. And so if you look at the double hung windows, I'm going to call it the interior side of the lot, those are double hung that if you look at the meeting rails on those double hungs, they will align with the original double hungs that are being rehabilitated on the front of the building. Same way with the transom height on those windows is the same as the top of the arch on the front of the street side elevation. So that is really the reasoning for those sizes, and the placement is for light for the apartment.
Okay. Does anyone have any issues with the windows or want to talk about the windows at all?
No.
Okay.
I have one other comment.
Sure.
I did see a comment in the staff report. I just want to clarify the windows that are on the other side of the building where the building is adjacent and butts up to it. The plan is to just replace those windows, just new windows. They're pretty well shot. We're not really changing anything on that elevation.
Okay. Did we move on to the discussion of the door/ATM?
Yep.
You had a lot of thoughts. Is there anything you want to add or kick off?
My only thought is that with the revisions to the internal layout of the building, having the second door on the frontage doesn't really make sense. So it's not really functional. I think an ATM on the exterior of the building, that's a community use. And I think the application as it stands is sympathetic to the historic appearance of that entryway. So I didn't have a problem with the ATM there. I think the application is reasonable.
I have a question on the ATM. As far as that door being there, is it possible, the existing bank right now, you walk inside and you use their ATM. So with this one, was it possible to open the door and the ATM is inside of there, and when the door's closed, people can't see the ATM? And I understand the door's not original, but we could perhaps find the most original looking door we could.
So are you suggesting that the ATM goes on the inside of the building?
Yes.
So I'm going to answer your question a little bit, not directly. So I'm sorry if this sounds a little bit, I'm not going to go around the question. So the ATM is placed right there for a couple of reasons. One is for easy access to the public. Two, we are we're changing the use of this building. So by building code, we have to update our ADA access to that commercial space. So we are handling ADA access by creating a sidewalk along the edge of the building to that door that's midway down the building and entering into the building there. By leaving the ATM right there, we're able to create an ATM accessible or an ADA accessible ATM to the public. In order to put an ATM on the inside of the building, we'd have to create an interior threshold from the city right of way that's in a kind of a protected enclosure. That would mean ripping up the entire sidewalk that's there, that's actually a slope, and creating basically a zero threshold to walk into the building. And so that sidewalk historically, if you look at all the photos, we're actually kind of maintaining that historic facade and that step up into the building, really kind of trying to preserve that entry of how it worked, and then giving you sort of the best of both worlds by having ADA access to the building through the inside. So it's a long way of saying this was the best solution we could find for the ATM that allowed both the best function for the bank and for the public without having to go down a long sidewalk and into the building, or having extensive changes to the sidewalk grade. And frankly, we did look at that. There's enough drop there that you end up with a step in the middle of your sidewalk and a potential other ramp. And so it creates a railing situation. And I think it's a hazard in the city right away at the sidewalk. So this is, and we've done this in other buildings. So this is the solution that we sort of settled on with everybody.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. And I will add to your materials discussion, the surround of the ATM has not been decided, much like the elevator, because we wanted to leave that open in case there was something. We would probably use a metal panel or a paint, something to paint that out around the ATM.
So is the ATM inset from like an alcove?
It's probably inset about 8 inches. So
Oh, okay. You
inset,
couldn't move it to like the side where it's not viewable straight on in the front elevation. Okay. Other thoughts on the ATM?
I think the ATM is just efficient for the floor plan as well, let alone the sidewalk issues, right? Because if you have to now walk into an alcove to the ATM, I mean, you're just deterring from the interior floor plan as well. So I'm okay with it on the front, on the sidewalk.
Yeah, I guess the only other thing I'd say is that the position of the ATM in the teller area, I know our remit isn't the interior of the building, but the bar in the Brown Bear Cafe that is a historic bar, and the application preserves that bar and integrates it into the teller area, which is associated with the ATM. So I think the application is sympathetic in preserving that historic aspect of the building with its current location.
Shane, you have your hand?
Yeah. I am conflicted because I agree with everything everybody said, and my personal view is that the ATM should be allowed, that the current door that's there doesn't really look particularly historic or nice, and that I actually think the aesthetic will be much more seamless as proposed. But I want to flag that we are kind of making up rules as we go, and perhaps that's okay since we are rewriting the code and developing a new builder's handbook over the next little bit. But if we were strictly interpreting the rules that were provided to this committee, they're pretty clear that we would have to say no, because the builder's handbook, as described in the memo we received, says that the original, even though it's not truly original, door needs to be preserved. And so I'd like to figure out a way for us to not impose arbitrary and not great rules on these applicants, despite our outdated and not great rules that we have in front of us that we've acknowledged and are working towards addressing. while also not going like full Wild West where we just make up every rule for every application as we go along between now and whenever the new code gets adopted. So I don't know if this is a question for CPS or Lucy or for the whole committee to consider, but you know, how do we move forward in a productive way, acknowledging that we're ignoring existing rules and not necessarily doing something that is going to be supported by the new code either, since it hasn't been made yet. We're kind of in this like weird murky space. So I'm looking for guidance from staff and CPS on what to do here with kind of those conflicts acknowledged.
Do you know when the fire occurred, or when that door was replaced?
Do not. I just know there's plenty of evidence because of the structural work that we're gonna have to do there.
Okay.
And we've looked at it. We actually had SHPO out here, State Historic Preservation Office. So the stair has been modified. It's there. There's extensive floor repairs over the time. I mean, it's pretty significant. There is a historic photo. I think it was in the packet. It shows that door. But I mean, the first comment from the National Park Service is like, well, that door's not original.
Yeah.
You know,
Okay.
I mean, but do we know when the fire is? No. We don't.
Okay.
Perhaps we could find the answer to that by looking at old Silverton standard newspapers, going to the Historical Society, finding out what that building looked like originally before the fire.
Well, Chris, if the SHPO has stated that door is not original, can we take that into consideration when comparing it to the builder's handbook requirements?
You can. The builder's handbook specifically states preserving original entryways. It was just my comment below that discusses the door. So whether you interpret the entryway itself being affected or the door itself being removed, it's kind of up to the committee's decision.
And I'm not a town attorney, but it does seem that they use the 50-year standard throughout a number of different places in the builder's handbook, which if we take that was written in, you know, a while ago, is even more indicative that it's likely that a fiberglass door and then metal, like, and then door that's like got the round, like 80s deal in it, that those doors are probably not from the period of significance. I mean, it seems that the intent of the builder's handbook is to steer folks towards the preservation of items from the period of significance, not from the 1970s or 80s or 90s per se. Right. So I mean, if I was just guessing based on my knowledge of doors, I would not put these in the period of significance personally, at least. Now that's a lot of guesswork on the part of, you know, committee members. It is a little bit outside of the bounds, as Shane mentioned, but I do think that we are under a code rewrite, so.
Yeah, and my thought is what's not guesswork is the SHPO stating that that is not an original door, and I don't know if that we can take that into account during this review. But it sounds like it's up to the committee, Chris. Could you clarify that one more time? Oh, Chris, you're muted.
Yeah, the committee can make kind of changes as they see fit to fit each application. So whether you guys review this and determine that it's not the original door and it's potentially not 50 years old or older, you can kind of make your decisions as you go.
I guess I'm wondering for the applicant, is it burdensome for you to come back to us with information on when the fire will likely was, or do you think that's at all possible?
Well, I would say yes.
Okay.
I mean, we exhaust a certain number of resources going through federal and state reviews. And so I guess I want to make a comment because I was a deputy SHPO and I ran things like the State Historical Fund. So I've seen this sort of stuff before. One of the things that, and so I'm going to circle back to this, but if you're going to become a certified local government, which I really hope that you do, one of the base requirements is that your guidelines follow the Secretary of Interior standards. And what's cool about that is that is the basis for any of these tax credit projects.
Mhm.
That's how these tax credit projects. So to get approval means that we've met the minimum requirements or standards. And in this case, for rehabilitation, there's 4 standards. It's not preservation, it's rehabilitation. And under the rehabilitation standards, it allows you to take an original door, and for things like for building code, it allows you to swing that door out, because to get people out of a building, the door needs to swing out by code. Or put a TPO or a modern membrane roof on a building, and you're still following historic standards. So under this, the reason this was approved is it was determined that that door, that opening wasn't original. But if you really look at it, our whole facade there, all of the windows on the second floor were missing. We're reconstructing those. All of the windows and the door into the main area in between those steel columns is being reconstructed out of wood, and we are using double pane glass. That's all standards that follow the Secretary of Interior standards and allowed under preservation work. So, you know, the idea here is that someday somebody wants to put a door back in there. If you think about taking out that panel where the ATM is, it's easily done. And you still have the transom where a transom would have been, and the original transom. So we're following, and even the doors that were there historically were double doors. Well, those aren't going to meet current codes. So that's why going into the bank, there's a single door with a little bit of a side light. That's a modern interpretation, but they're okay with that at these levels, because they want to know that that was a change that was done for a specific reason, and it's allowed to do that. So, you know, I know it's arbitrary because you have certain codes in place now, but as you move forward, those Secretary of Interior standards will become kind of your minimum. And then of course you'll add those things that are unique to Silverton, which is awesome. But that's really my kind of soapbox about that. But that helps or not, but there you go.
Yeah, thank you. So I guess, sorry, I don't want to be the one to talk all the time. Does anyone have immediate reactions to that? So I guess for me personally, you know, I don't feel comfortable recommending something that doesn't at least marginally conform to what we have as codes already, but I do feel comfortable recommending something to the Board of Trustees that says, like, for example, we want to approve this application. The intent of this committee is to revise our code. Like, we know that our plan is to revise our codes to, you know, allow folks to have access to funding to become a certified local government. Like, those are trustee priorities. Like, I wonder if this is something where we could say, you know, we are comfortable with all of this within our purview, except for we're stuck on this door issue. You know, the bodies that know more about this than we do have already said it's okay. Like, we'd like to receive approval from sort of the body that we recommend things to, like sort of a higher body. I don't know if you all, Shane, you sit on the Board of Trustees. Do you think that would be a productive exercise?
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I think that saying that this committee supports the application, but given our current construct, isn't able to say yes to certain things and highlight those, and ask the Board of Trustees if they would like to overrule the builder's handbook guidelines that we're taking a more strict interpretation of. I think that's really good, where we say both. We say, yes, we like it. We can't officially say yes, but we encourage you to consider the circumstances. Because I do think the Board of Trustees has the ability to, or more flexibility in saying, and looking at this and saying, you know, we want to approve this anyway.
So before we consider that option, is there anything beyond that? Like, I feel like we've beaten the door issue a bit to death. Is there anything beyond the door issue that you all want to discuss? I know we've covered the substantive issues outlined by CPS, but Melissa, your hand is up.
Well, the new screening wall on the second floor deck on the alley there, right? Just like the what is the exterior cladding of the elevator, I think that needs to be a condition as well, because what is that? We have no idea. Right? So on the alley, the deck off of the little addition on the back that used to be the kitchen, right? So here we have this large screening wall. I just think that should be a condition as well, to know what that is going to be. What material will be used.
Is that within our purview? I mean, doesn't it have to be viewable from the historic or A-Rod district to be within our purview?
Well, because there's no building next to it, I think you'll see it, right?
Oh, touche. Okay. Sure. And then that's something we could also choose to defer to the National Park Service if we wanted to.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea.
Okay. Good, great catch, Melissa. Any other substantive issues? Not so much items that don't have anything to do with us. I know there's like the use review in there, but that's not something we can adjudicate on. Like square footage requirements and stuff, but I would just note that one of the requirements is that the facade be less than 25 feet, and on the architectural renderings, it's 22 feet. So I think we meet that one. And then just as a point of fact, it does appear that there are 2 awnings on the east elevation, not one, which I don't think matters, but just a correction. Anything else before we move towards kind of a decision? All right, well, if there's no further discussion, before we have a motion, we get to hear from the applicants. Do you have any final words for us?
Thank you, staff. Thank you, Chris, you're online. Thanks, everybody, for taking the time. I know you're volunteers, so I get it. I do also want to say that, you know, if there's anything that we can do on this project, or I can do, I would offer, you know, if there's tours or other conversations about this beyond this meeting that you have about tax credits, I'd be happy to come back and talk about it. Tax credits are very interesting because they're all or nothing. So if one thing is done wrong on this building that's approved now, say we do something that's different and the federal or state does not agree with it, it risks all of our tax credits. They're not a la carte. So if you consider a building like this, and this is the power of these tax credits, 55% of the applicable work on this building could potentially be a tax credit. So when you think about the economics of that, it's pretty powerful. So I guarantee you, we will be following whatever is approved by the state or federal, because those are very important to the success of the project. So I just want to say thank you to everybody, and that's a pretty great discussion.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Yeah. So I know, at least what I heard when we were appointed to this committee is that there was a need from the Board of Trustees for us to balance kind of the cost efficacy of these projects with the existing builder's handbook to the best of our ability before we have a new code. So I think the tax credit piece is part of the reason that my recommendation would be that we would really like to accept this project as it's been presented to us, but with the conditions noted, which it sounds like they're going to follow anyway. But I'm curious if there's objection to that, or if we all sort of feel cohesive on that.
No, I agree. I would recommend that we approve it with that specific condition on the materials.
Just to clarify, would you recommend to the Board of Trustees that they approve, or would you recommend that this committee just sort of?
Well, I think given Shane's comments, I'd agree with recommending that we would like to approve, but we're constrained by the builder's handbook, and this is the restriction. So
okay,
I'd be okay with that.
Okay, Melissa, I think you were saying something, but you were on mute.
Oh no, yeah, I'm good, thank you.
Yeah, and I would just add to that recommendation the asterisk I mentioned before, that we haven't considered either the mixed use perspective or the height restriction in any way.
Okay. So we do have like one, Maria, I'm sorry.
Well, I disagree. I'm not going to vote for this to move it on, and because there's too many questions out there still. And I think maybe once town board talks about it, discusses it, finds out more answers, they could bring it back to us. Doesn't sound like we really have any power.
Is there a specific question you'd like answered?
Yeah, I don't like the elevator.
Did you have a question?
No, I don't have a question. I've already asked my questions, but I am still in disagreement with it.
Okay,
So, I mean, I'm outvoted, obviously, but that's my opinion
okay.
From an aesthetic perspective and your reading of.
and a
our-
historical perspective.
Yeah,
And I think that
Maria.
if they, yes, sir.
I was just going to say the thing that would be the most helpful about a dissenting opinion on something like this for the board to consider would be to, like, the more clearly you can say why you're dissenting, the better the discussion by the board can be to consider that dissenting opinion. So if you could just kind of go through the things you don't like about it, that would just be really, really helpful for the next board's discussion.
Okay, well, first of all, the elevator, we don't know anything about the materials yet, how it's going to be built, what it's going to look like. We don't know anything about what will be around this ATM machine, like Melissa was saying, we don't know about the screening on the deck. So there's a lot of unanswered questions, so I cannot vote to approve this. But as I said, I'm obviously outvoted, but that's my opinion. And you know, as someone who grew up in Silverton, I've been here since I was a little girl. This town is all hodgepodge. And you guys talk a lot about codes. We got to do this code. We got to do this code. You know, let's face facts. People in Silverton do not follow the codes. If they did, we wouldn't have 8 or 9 houses that are halfway done. Which has nothing to do with this meeting or this committee, but it has to do with our town.
And Maria, I would just comment that we are making it conditional upon, we need to see the questions that you have about around the ATM and the screening and the materials, that would be conditional to our recommendation. So in other words, we are, those questions remain unanswered and we want answers to those. So I think that we can still move forward with this and still get those questions answered in the future. We're not just launching this through. So keep that in mind.
I am keeping that in mind.
okay, so we do, just as a point of order, have something available to us, which is we could make a motion for conditional approval, and then we could make motions for the conditions. Like, all of it doesn't have to be one motion, because I know it's a lot for us to like say out loud, right? So that's just something that's available to us, like, is to have a sub motion. We could say, like, we move to conditionally approve, or to recommend conditional approval to the Board of Trustees, sub motion this, sub motion that, like, if we really want to break it up, or if someone feels strongly that they can, you know, obviously we are divided, but if they can summarize the majority opinion in the form of a motion, and we're ready to do that, I would suggest that now.
Just to recap, it sounds like where you're going with this, Jesse, is that the board wants to move to recommend approval to the Board of Trustees, but would like to have answers on what materials would be used for the structure enclosing the elevator, the second floor screening, and the ATM. And discussing that the builder's handbook does not allow you to recommend the approval of the ATM, and that the committee has not considered the use and the height.
I think that's mostly
So
true with
moved.
the exception. Wait, hold on.
Sorry, go ahead, Jesse.
I think that's mostly true with the exception, not that we want answers, but that we want them to conform to the NPS decision.
So you don't need you are not requesting that the Board of Trustees review the materials. You're just requesting that Tim and his team follow the SHPO and the National Park Service.
Well, I believe so. Shane, do you?
I was going to say, I think that in a best case scenario, and I don't know what the turnaround time is in talking to the NPS, but that they get guidance from the NPS on those materials prior to the board making the decision, or that we recommend that the board conditionally approve it, subject to the NPS dictating what those materials are, and then having administrative approval of that to make sure it's not kind of wildly out of line for Silverton. But I do think that those materials should be determined before the building permit gets issued,
I agree.
as opposed to just saying whatever NPS says goes.
Okay. All right, so considering that we're providing recommended direction to the board, I don't know that it's like we have to be super, super tight on the wording of the motion anyway. You know, provided that we're all kind of on the same page and discussing it kind of cohesively. That said, this is a public hearing, so we have to table or approve or deny or approve with conditions. And so to me, this is a form of tabling as a point of order, with.
Wait, so you want this to come back to the historic review committee?
No, or referring to committee, technically. I guess, do we have a refer to committee option in a hearing?
So that I think what we're talking about is a conditional approval. I think we're saying,
I think that is.
like, even, I know that we're like towing the line a bit, but I think we're saying, you know, we move to recommend conditional approval based on all of the things that Lucy outlined,
Yes.
with the caveat that by the strict interpretation of the builder's code, you know, we aren't really permitted to approve it. But we're
Yeah,
still
except for-
recommending conditional approval.
Except this committee isn't conditionally approving it, because right, like if somebody came through and we conditionally approved something, they wouldn't have to go to the Board of Trustees. Is it a conditional approval with referral to a committee?
You're recommending approval to the Board of Trustees.
Yeah, I said recommending conditional approval as opposed to conditionally approving it, because I don't think there is anything we can conditionally approve. Kind of to Maria's point, we don't have power. We're just a recommending body.
Right.
We're
okay.
just a filter.
Yes. Yes, okay. All right, so.
Which, you know, whether, I know that you're laughing because it sounds silly, but it's so helpful for the trustees to have, you know, this level of review done prior to considering an ultimate decision, and also being able to provide feedback to an applicant so that, you know, if there are problems, they can address them before coming in front of the trustees.
Sure.
So this is a really useful thing, even though it feels maybe not so useful at the moment.
Okay. So I think, okay, so as a point of order, I think I have to restate the motion. So let me do my best.
And can you include the conditions that we've discussed?
Yeah,
So that we have that language in the motion.
yes, of course. Okay, so we have a motion on the table to recommend conditional approval to the Board of Trustees with the following conditions. One, that for the ATM area, the screening up on the new deck, and the elevator, the materials for those be in conformance with NPS. And there was something else, shoot. And yeah, in conformance with National Park Service. And then we also want to just provide the asterisk that we did not review the height issue at all, because it's not within our purview.
Or the residential use on the first floor.
Oh, yeah, or the residential use or any of the use subject to review items that are not within the purview of the committee. Yeah. Did someone second that motion, which should have happened before I stated all of
The
that?
restriction that we have, that we can't really approve per builder's handbook, right?
Yes, and the note for the board that we feel we can't directly approve this because of the restrictions of the builder's handbook, and want the weighing in on the intent of the future, which involves having a certified local government and so forth.
Seconded.
Okay,
Seconded.
so we're supposed to second it before I stated all of that, but do we feel that we're on the we're on the same page, everyone, with what it is? And we can always go back and watch the YouTube and type it up later. Okay, all right, so yes, I will now, I'd like to call the question, please. Anna, if you will do the roll call. As a reminder, no committee member may abstain. It is a yes or no vote item only. Go ahead.
Maria Zamora,
No.
David Pollitt,
Yes.
Melissa Childs,
Yes.
Mayor Furman,
Yes.
Jesse Rowe.
Yes. And then I would just say, oh, sorry. So motion passes and this public hearing is now closed. And then I would just say kind of like as a personal note, whether the committee report, which could be delivered, I think, according to our bylaws by Lucy, myself, or Shane, when it goes to the Board of Trustees, and this is discussed, you know, we sort of trust that the nuance of the dissenting opinion will also be included.
Yes, and I'd say in the future, if someone is gonna vote no, to state those reasons. However, I think we have your reasons already, so I think we're.
Yeah, and we can't do that
and just
during a roll call anyway, so it would be good to state them before. which
and
we
Jesse,
did.
for clarification, when we do the committee updates, we won't go into the substance of public hearings, but when this does come in front of the board as a public hearing, that will get discussed at length.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that for us.
For sure. I
All
just didn't
right.
want you to like, see us gloss past this in committee reports and get frustrated.
Yeah, so I'm just gonna break from order for a minute and just say to the applicant, is there anything you want us to clarify? Because that was our first public hearing and it was a little confusing. Before you're like finished, but.
Unofficially, no, I get you guys are dealing with code changes. And we know that. And we also know that you're kind of boning up on some of this stuff. So that's totally cool. This is actually a great project to do that on. I don't always want to be the test case, but
Yeah.
I'm pretty confident in the work that we're doing is.
This is probably the best test case this committee could have gotten. The amount of work that has gone into this application is unbelievable. So I just really want to say thank you so much for all the work that you've put into the project and to the community.
Yeah, and so, like I said, I'm happy to come back and talk about this stuff. It's like, if there's an educational component that you guys all need sometime in the future, and I've got plenty of examples to show. Every project you're gonna run into is different. There's no silver bullet to this stuff. So these are all very good discussions and very much appreciated. I think, one of the things that, from a client perspective, right now we're trying to get building permits. So that's really our primary focus, is how to allow the builder to keep going. And I will say staff has been incredibly helpful in doing that, understanding that, we need to get some sort of recommendation here before we can do any work on the exterior of the building. We're going to follow the rules. We're going to follow the permitting process. We have an incredible amount of work to do on the interior of this building. So, we've got other things we're going to be doing while we're working through this process. But I just want to say thank you. It's a great discussion. We'll look forward to the trustee meeting and working with staff on any of this and getting as much clarified as we possibly can. Appreciate that.
Thank you.
Thank you. We'll send you an email this week.
Yeah, I tried to come to that, but I'll just look for your notes.
Yeah, we'll send some notes. Thank you, Tim.
Thank you.
Okay, so we will now move on to the bylaw update review. And then just as mentioned earlier, if there's anything in terms of suggestions for formats, changes to the staff reports, or like the way that we do business as a committee, now that we've had this experience, this is a great time to discuss those items. Topic is open. And Lucy, once again, unfortunately, I can't I guess, let me just call on staff for their perspective. Yeah. But I think this is actually a great demonstration, because one thing I have a problem with is the voting members of the committee who are allowed to speak out of turn in discussion are just the 5 citizens. And Lucy's perspective is really valuable to us. So we either need to get in the habit of calling on her constantly, or or adding her as an official committee member or something like that. But right now we're kind of out of order. In that Lucy is guiding us and interjecting a lot, which is not Lucy's fault. It's just the way the world is right now for this committee. So I am curious if we want to make her a committee member, or maybe add something where she's a voting member or something like that. I'm not sure. Or we need an exception to the rules of order. Shane.
I would just mention that if we take option A or B to make Lucy a committee member or make her a voting member, that requires revising the ordinance, which requires two
Right.
trustee meetings and a bunch of admin time. So I'd say if there's another way to do it, that would be ideal.
And I think we can always like learn as a committee, like when to call on Lucy so that we like specifically, like so that I as the chair get better at like recognizing her whenever she needs to speak. Because technically that has to happen under our current proceedings, I believe, as far as I'm reading them.
Yeah, sorry.
For example, Lucy, what is your opinion?
I can look into the legality of that. I apologize if I've been speaking out of turn. I technically am a member according to the ordinance. I just am not a voting member. I don't know if that changes things. So that is something I can add to my list.
Yeah, and I think perhaps even just something about like, you know, the discussion for the committee like includes non-voting members or something like that. But I think unless you're a voting member, Bob's rules is, well, you should just get a legal opinion on it for us if you don't mind.
And I'd like to interject
The
too,
trust-
that, I
Yeah,
think
please
that
go.
Lucy's opinion is so valuable, her perspective, because she knows so much more than personally myself. And I learn a lot from her at all these meetings. And I think hopefully the attorney will allow you to speak because we learn from you and it's really valuable.
Yeah, agreed. Shane, you had,
At the trustee level, we were able to informally agree to slightly different procedures as long as they weren't in some type of like ethical or code breach. And so, for example, we decided to call ourselves by our first names, which so far we've been doing here as well without any type of like official decision. But I would be curious to know if Clayton has an issue with that. But I think we could just say like, unless we have a problem with people interrupting each other, other things like that, we can proceed as we have been without having to modify our bylaws or ordinance. But
yeah,
I defer to Clayton and
okay.
Lucy.
Yeah, I don't know how much like availability there is for traditions in like something like this where there's committee business and a rule of order, like of parliamentary procedure versus not. I mean, clearly Silverton operates with traditions at the board of trustee level, so why couldn't we? That seems. I guess another item that came to my attention is in the public comment section. It doesn't say that will be customarily limited to 3 minutes. I don't know if it's necessary to add that or if we can just simply add that. This is maybe another legal question.
Again, at the board level, we just have to be consistent was the advice we got from Clayton. We didn't have to say that it was going to be 3 minutes in any type of code or other written format. We just have to, in order to protect like free speech and constitutional rights, we just have to treat everyone exactly the same.
Okay.
And so if we choose to be 3 minutes, then we just have to always be 3 minutes.
Okay. For the noticing procedures.
But again, if when Clayton watches this or when Gloria or Lucy talk to Clayton, if I'm misspeaking, please correct me at the next meeting.
Totally. Yeah, I'm just more like reading the bylaws and intending to get like some clarity for us. Because this was our first real meeting, kind of. I mean, it's not technically our first real meeting, but it's our first meeting with a hearing, I would say.
When you point out the next one, Jesse, could you mention which bylaw you're referring to? Which section?
Thank you. Yeah. So section 5, notice of meetings and hearings. Right now we have 5 days and it's not specified whether that's calendar or business days. I don't know if that's important. Again, that's maybe just like a Clayton thing. A lot of this is really like administrative in nature. And then I'm not sure if when we adopt this, we have to update the date. That was the other thing I saw. Were there any other bylaws, Shane?
Yeah, the conflicts of interest provision did get revised to reflect what we have at the trustee level, but we also added at our last meeting, I think we had consensus to add a sentence saying that if someone on the board or committee, owns a property or has an interest in a property adjacent to the subject property of an application, that would be deemed a conflict of interest, and that sentence didn't make it in.
Right.
And if important, I've flagged that in our YouTube video that is at minute 20 to minute 20:22:30, if you need to go back and see what was specifically recommended by the board, if in case I missummarized it just now.
And
Awesome.
to clarify, you said that that sentence was eliminated. In other words, that the adjacent property owner is not a conflict of interest.
No. So saying if one, like if I own a building that's adjacent to the subject property, then I would be conflicted out and I wouldn't participate in the review.
Okay, so that was the determination. That would be a conflict. Okay, thank you.
Correct. And we didn't have to, and Clayton weighed in that discussion, and we thought that just for clarity and for the appearance of being fully objective, that was a helpful thing to add to our bylaws.
Right.
Thank you.
So I hope I don't regret asking this, but in the interest of, like, we just had a public hearing using the bylaws and Bob's rules and the builder's handbook to the best of our ability. Obviously the builder's handbook is still under revision. Is there anything else that you all are noticing is working or not working that we should codify with regards to the bylaws, for example? Yeah, okay. All right, so given these revisions, I believe we can adopt the bylaws as is with the expectation that they're going to be revised in the future, like administratively. Okay.
Which I think is the same thing we did last time, right? We adopted the bylaws as revised, and then we're just adding some more revisions that either didn't make it in or additional to what we discussed before. Is that right, Lucy?
Yes, yeah, that's what we did last time and what we can do tonight. And I have them here if we wanted to sign the ones from last time, but I'll just do the same thing where we edit these and then I'll send them out in the packet and then we can sign them at the next meeting if that works for all of you.
Could I request
and
that
one
you-
request I have. Yeah, go ahead.
sorry,
Sorry,
go
I think you're gonna ask the same thing.
Oh, I was just gonna say, could I request that the newest version be redlined so we don't have to like read through the whole thing to find out where it's changed?
Yeah, I'll send out two versions just so we also have the real version of the bylaws. So I can send out a red line version and then the non-red line version. How does that work for you?
That's great.
Okay.
For you, Shane? Yeah, okay.
That's awesome.
All right.
I'm also fine with track changes if you're using Microsoft Word, and that's easier than trying to find some redline programming.
Yeah, I would agree.
Okay, that sounds good.
Or even comments or something, word updated. Yeah. All right, anything else on the bylaws, or are we reaching consensus, and may I have a motion?
I make a motion to approve the bylaws as revised, as recommended to be revised.
I second the motion.
Seconded by Maria. And the motion on the table is to approve the bylaws as will be revised. Anna, I'd like to call the question if we can have roll call, please.
Maria Zamora,
Yes.
David Paulette,
Yes.
Melissa Childs,
Yes.
Mayor Furman,
Yes.
Jesse Rowe.
Yes. Okay, that one was relatively painless. Well done, everyone. All right, so the next item is approval of the minutes. That's our previous item number 2. As a reminder, just for the committee, minutes are not meant to be a line by line accounting of everything that was said. They just need to contain the substantive decisions of the committee, as well as any direction that the committee does give to staff. Does anyone have any corrections to the minutes or suggestions about the minutes as they appear in the packet? Shane.
I found the minutes to omit a handful of important things and slightly misstate a couple of other things. And I think it's really hard to take the minutes in the format that they were in, where it says like Mayor Furman said, Jesse said, and so on and so forth. And so I think it would be most helpful to not utilize those last minutes and to use a similar format like you suggested that the town board suggests, where it simply summarizes the larger issues that says like a discussion was had relating to the checklist. The committee gave direction that the checklist should be revised and used as follows, something like that. And I think that's a lot easier or Anna to keep track of. Unfortunately, I think to do that for these minutes, you might have to go back and watch the YouTube video. But the other reason we don't need it, the level of specificity that was attempted in the current minutes, is because we have the YouTube video also.
Yeah, and that's referenced, I think, too, in our newly revised bylaws where it, on item, like one of the last items. Section 4, under miscellaneous provisions, the second to last section. So I would support that. I think the easiest thing might be to move to table the minutes approval until such time as a revised minutes is given to the committee.
And I would also like to say that my name was left off of the attendees of the meeting, and I was here.
I apologize. I thought I,
No problem. I just noticed that my name wasn't on there, but I was referenced in the minutes, so obviously I was here.
Right, do we have consensus?
And I don't think, yeah, and I hope that this isn't used as something negative. I think, we're all learning, and there's going to be
Right.
some inefficiencies as we figure things out. And I apologize if this is duplicative work in the requests that I'm making. But I think in an attempt to be thorough in those minutes, we just kind of would be adding things to the record that maybe didn't exactly represent the discussion.
All right, it sounds like we might have consensus. Can we call the question or get a motion? I mean,
I might move to table the minutes.
seconded. All right, there's a motion on the table to table the minutes. Anna, if we could please have roll call.
okay, Maria Zamora,
Yes.
David Pollitt,
Yes.
Melissa Childs,
Yes.
Mayor Furman,
Yes.
and Jesse Rowe.
Yes. All right. We did have suggestions to potentially include the CPS checklist discussion in tonight's agenda. I'm not clear if we actually added that. I'm sorry, I can't remember. We didn't add it. So if that becomes, I would encourage folks to contact either myself, Shane, or Lucy. All of us are empowered to add things to the agenda, or you could just suggest the whole committee to add things to the agenda. If you want to discuss the use of the CPS checklist in the future. Another item for the agenda that we did not have tonight that was previously discussed as an action item for the committee was setting goals just in relation to where we are with the code rewrite and everything else, and kind of what we need to accomplish, if anything, other than simply public hearings and work sessions with CPS. Is there any other business before we move to adjourn? All right, well, with the committee business concluded, may I please have a motion to adjourn?
Did we do the public comment or no? Sorry, I missed that. I zoned out.
Oh, thank you.
Do we need
Yes,
public comment?
Thank you. All right, our final agenda item is public comment. And we will start with anyone in person, unless the applicant wishes to readdress us. I don't think we have anyone in person. So anyone online who wishes to comment, please raise your hand on the Zoom profile. YouTube does not allow us to do public comment. So if you are online, Zoom and a hand raise. All right, seeing none, I will now close the public comment section of the meeting. If there is no further business, may I have a motion to adjourn?
I motion we adjourn the meeting.
Thank you.
Second.
I will second. Okay, Shane, second. And the motion on the table is to adjourn the meeting. A roll call, please.
Maria Zamora,
Yes.
David Pollitt,
Yes.
Melissa Childs,
Yes.
Mayor Furman,
Yes.
Jesse Rowe.
Yes.
All right, thank you guys.
Thank you all.
Great job, Jesse. Thanks, everybody.
Yep. Thank you very much. Bye.